So the developers have been kind enough to send me a full review key for this game, and I certainly put enough time into this game now that I can say exactly who this game will likely be for, and who better stays away. Soulbound Online is trying to mesh together an MMO with a persistent shared overworld and a bullet haven roguelite into one game, and let me just say, I was tremendously confused in the first 2 hours of playing, but I did eventually figure this game out. So here's how a normal session actually goes. You log into a shared overworld, where of course other real players are walking around. I of course saw virtually no players, because I played this on a limited review build, but you will see players. Anyways, you're doing quests, farming, gathering, building up your own home base. This entire part moves at a slow pace. When you're ready for actual combat, you head into a dungeon, either alone or with up to 2 other people. The moment you step in, your character is essentially stripped back down to level 1, no matter how strong you'd gotten in the last run. From there, it plays like a survivor style game. The enemies pile up around you, you're picking upgrades on the fly, and things get more chaotic the longer you last. If you clear enough of the dungeon, then you extract with whatever gear and other loot dropped along the way. That stuff is the part that actually sticks. You bring this stuff back to the overworld, craft with it, wear it, and it makes your next run stronger. Then you go back in and do it all over, except every run reshuffles the layout and the upgrades on offer. That back and forth, the slow world building feeding a fast, constantly resetting dungeon loop, is basically what the whole game runs on. Aside from that, there's stuff like cooking and chemistry, a player-driven economy, farming and more. A bit more on that later. For your dungeon runs, you bring in a small handful of abilities, and each one branches into its own separate tree. The game does not have a locked class either, so whatever gear you're carrying decides what kind of character you are in that moment, and swapping it changes that instantly. So if you're that kind of player who likes messing with builds and watching your weird combinations working after all, that's where the game actually clicks. Now in this game you've also got a personal base to build up over time. There's a manufacturing table to start with. You add generators to keep everything powered. Eventually you're crafting your own weapons and armor at stations you have built yourself. And if decorating is your thing, there's a full room editor too. You can farm tons of crops, sell them for profit, cook with them, gather tons of materials once you have the proper tools, and all of this eventually turns into gear that you make with your own hands. There's a light story running underneath everything as well. Now let's talk about what doesn't work as well. Your character moves incredibly slow at the start, slow enough that it's the first thing you notice before you have even reached combat. Crafting eats real time too, waiting on timers for basic items, hitting profession level walls before certain recipes even unlock. I frequently felt like the game was not respecting my time, especially because of the character's movement. You can eventually mitigate this with mounts and gear, but damn, do the early hours drag. With this many systems stacked on top of each other, it's also quite hard to tell what you should be focused on, or why a piece of armor is locked behind a stat that you have never touched. Also based on my experience, the enemies scale up as you level, so if you grind too hard early, you can accidentally make your main story fights tougher than they need to be, which is a strange thing to run into in a game that also wants you wandering around and taking your time. Also keep in mind the overworld is pretty massive, so depending on the game's success, it could feel pretty empty. Combat itself isn't especially technical either. A lot of your abilities fire on their own, so you're mostly dodging, choosing upgrades, and repositioning yourself, rather than pulling off anything complex. The standard fights can also start feeling the same after a while. It's really the bosses that stand out. There's another quite important thing to be aware of: the Yoku system. In this game, every dungeon chest costs Yoku to open, and the higher difficulty runs cost more. So you have to beat the map, beat the boss, but also pay Yoku to actually get your reward. You get 800 Yoku back each day, and you can earn extra by completing contracts, so it's not a hard paywall. But still, it does mean your ability to claim loot is limited by a daily energy style resource. Also worth knowing, the game is in early access, so there's more coming. The content tops out around level 50 right now, with plans to eventually push that to 99. There's one raid in the game today. More are planned. The game has about 50 handwritten quests, and the plans are to more than double that, along with more language support, and eventually Steam Deck support down the line. So who is this for? If you want a slow burn game with good build crafting, enjoy messing with upgrade trees, and watching a normal ability turn into something ridiculous, all coupled with a persistent world, then this hits that. If you really want a tight, technical, and tactical combat with responsive movement, where combos take skill, this is likely going to feel pretty light, since so much runs on autopilot. Additionally, Additionally, if you hate juggling a bunch of half-explained systems, then the onboarding process here is rough enough to be a real problem.